Okay, thank you and welcome back. So as Gary concluded with his last slide, right? It's all about human judgment. And we have a fantastic panel of humans right here to move from chess to business, which, even though I was not supposed to say this, is way more complex than chess is, of course, and involves humans. As Ardeen David said, engineering is easy, technology, we can understand it. Humans are very tricky. So how do you bring AI into an organization, into a company, into a university? How do you deal with educating people, the mental models, and how to make them work? So our fantastic panel today combines the best of business and academia. So we have Linda Avery, formerly at fantastic and very big companies, right? Like Verizon, Goldman Sachs, but now starting 2 companies, right? We saw in our introduction. Pratt, basically currently in fintech, and representative of the smaller companies, as I will kind of go down with my questions. We have Rick Arut, expert on influence, OB leadership. Nada, you already heard in the beginning, our wonderful professor in supply chain and management. And then Chris Riedel, joint appointment between business and computer science. And we're just about to publish our first paper together, right, Chris? That's what we're hoping.
I hope so.
So just a few questions to start us with. So every time a new technology comes up, I think about how we have to basically adapt our mental models to make this happen, to make people understand what the process is by which this can create value. And so I wanted to start with you, Linda, to kind of can you walk us through how you help adapt mental models, also in very big companies, and how you go about that?
Well, it's interesting. I think there's certainly the mental model, but I think more than anything, there is the operating model, and I think we've been talking quite a bit about that. So, if the points that have been raised today, I think, David, you write quite extensively about the need for leadership to engage. And at this point, I think we're really at a juncture where if leaders are not engaging, it is quite likely that their organizations are not going to survive. So if you think about what's required, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. AI is very expensive. And therefore, you can't just stay in that experimental stage. Even those experiments are expensive. What you really have to be thinking about is, where can AI drive the greatest value? And so looking across the organization, you need to be able to make a coherent judgment as to where that value is to be gotten. So, okay, let's say you want to get return on equity. Are you going to focus on revenue? Are you going to focus on operational efficiency? Are you going to focus on financial leverage, culture? Where are you going to focus? And then you take it down from there. So you have to have really kind of a game plan in terms of how to leverage AI, which is, I think, a very different way of thinking as a leader. That's not the way that technology certainly has been run up to this point.
And I was going to switch to Pratt, right? So I think in the pre-session you told us, well, smaller companies kind of have less leeway to make mistakes, right? And they have to act very fast. So how do you see that playing out in these high technology industries with very nimble companies?
Yeah, I think it presents a very interesting challenge, right? Because for nimble companies that are looking to kind of promote their product, put it out there in the marketplace, they want to be able to differentiate against their competitors and continue to build equity value, but they're resource constrained at the end of the day, and the ability for them to take risks, especially big ones and big bets, is very difficult. And so I think the human in the loop environment within a startup or kind of a smaller company, there's just not as many humans, frankly. And so how do you evaluate the potential value of AI in that type of environment where one small mistake can just blow up the entire company, right? And furthermore, there's unique kind of opportunities that those companies are going after. So the value set for AI is limited in terms of where the value can actually be generated for those kind of very focused opportunities that they're going after.
Okay, and we talked about the risk, right? Also in the previous speeches, like when do you as a human say, okay, I'll take the risk. I'm not going to be paralyzed by more data that I can analyze by staring more at the screen. So where do you take the risk in these situations? Maybe Rick, you can talk a bit about that topic.
Sure, I think so. I may be one of the individuals on the stage who I'm still fascinated by how the fax machine works, right? So all of a sudden, this AI thing is coming along, and I'll see it within the classrooms within the students. And I think what's really resonated with me fairly recently is that I, as the professor in the classroom, have a certain role, but within that role, I have to remind myself I'm the leader in the classroom at the time, and these are the followers in the classroom at the time. And I need to be able to remind myself of that. So as an example, in our syllabus, we've come up with a standard policy for this is how you can use AI, and this is the limitations for AI. And I just let it sit there all semester in the syllabus. It turns out I never brought it up in class. I never had a conversation. I never communicated my vision for the use of ChatGPT or any other instrument. And so just last week, I somehow or another a conversation on using ChatGPT came up within the context of ethics. And I had several students who said, we assumed that you would think we're cheating if we used AI. And in digging deeper, the reflection came back on me, because as the leader, I didn't communicate that very clearly. What are those expectations? So there's no way we're going to be able to engage them, and there's no way we're going to be able to really expand on I think the big advantages of technology in the classroom unless we remind ourselves that we have to have that conversation. We have to have that communication. So that's what I'm seeing.
So this is a very important point, right? And so Dean David talked about the importance of communication and also breaking silos. And so I loved kind of Nada's book, David's book. I also have my two co-authors in the room right now, Jakob and Kong, of Break the Wall, like how and why to democratize digital in your business. And so we talked a lot to leaders who indeed said, well, everything is siloed between data science and decision making, also between operations and marketing, for instance, right? So I was going to turn to Nada and say, hey, how can we really kind of communicate over boundaries and over silos?
Yeah, and I think this is really where organizational structure comes in, and it's absolutely critical. So, one of the things as I get older, I like growing. I want to grow. I always want to learn more. And I am tired of answering the same questions that I did when I was a doctoral student. And as a doctoral student, you always saw the operations people on one end, you saw the marketing people on the other end. And the common classic issue in companies was that marketing wants to sell, operations wants to make, and operations is interested about lowering inventory costs, marketing about making sales, and why don't they communicate? Well, fast forward all these years, we're still talking about this. Why are we still talking about this? This is really frustrating because we need to grow. We have to break the silos down. Technology, AI is here. I think that businesses are not going to survive if they don't. And I would say, because I'm on this board, one of the things that we've been saying is that all the companies that made it through COVID did something right, okay? But are those companies still going to be there in 5 years? So what do they have to do now? And I would say that really rethinking the business plan, adjusting it, reassessing, and a big part of that is technology and breaking the silos down.
And I was also going to add, so for instance, to figure out what's going on in other fields, right? Using technology as a tool, it has never been easier, right? To
That's
have
right.
something about, hey, what's going on right now in operations and other fields. And then, of course, I can go to Sheila or Ravi or Bruce to say, hey, what did the technology got wrong, right? Can you add some more of the recent flavor? But it has never been easier to educate ourselves a bit before we then make that move.
Exactly, and I think companies absolutely have to be nimble. I come from a healthcare family, so I think in terms of healthcare, microscopic living entities, and we have to be like that. A company has to be like that. It has to morph as things are needed, as the environment changes. A company cannot morph very quickly if it doesn't have internal transparency. Essential.
I want to add something to what you're saying, because I think there's so much truth to it. I think data is going to play an absolutely key role here.
Yes.
It certainly did at Verizon, where I witnessed what you were describing. But having the data, let's say market intelligence, that Tesla is expanding their plant in Austin, Texas, that impacts how you're going to manage customer engagement. That's going to impact the performance of the network. That's going to impact how we overall invest. And so I think we have a big opportunity here to break down the silos through the sharing of data. So
I agree.
It's a wonderful illustration how moves on the queen side affect the moves on the king side, right?
There you
Which
go.
we heard from Gary too. So I was also fascinated coming to Chris, right? But my Latin education, I always ask cui bono, who benefits? And so in this kind of realm, we heard from Gary that maybe in chess, the technology really helps weaker players to upgrade. But maybe in business it's different, and there's been a lot of kind of research and discussion about, hey, can for instance ChatGPT really helps you more if you're already an expert, if you already know something about the domain, versus whether you're a complete novice in something. So can you talk to some of your findings in that regard?
Yeah, this is a super important question in the research field and in companies that deploy AI right now, is to better understand what impact will AI have and who are the people who are benefiting from it. And one important thing to realize is that when we deploy AI in kind of real-world environments, usually it's up to the person to decide when and how to actually use the AI. And the research that I'm doing right now reveals that people generally, or in that setting at least, are not good at all about deciding when and how to use AI. And mostly they end up using AI in the wrong situations. They use AI to get feedback on situations in which they already did very well, as opposed to situations in which they failed. And Gary kind of pointed to this, that AI is kind of a very useful tool if you have this kind of growth mindset and you want to learn, but maybe you don't, and then those people end up using AI in the wrong way and don't improve.
I think also one of the things you pointed to, it says, so the task where AI is going to be great at is the one that you as the human decision maker can evaluate the output, right? So that you can say, hey, is this about okay? Is this good enough versus not? And otherwise, I see a lot of overconfidence. So one of the interesting research that I showed at the presentation last week was basically psychiatric kind of help in psychology today, actually, to basically rewrite their bio with ChatGPT or not. And so the researcher had a very clever way to figure this out. And he realized that novices did it a lot, and it hurted their business because they increased their price too much. So one thing affects the other thing. So they just, ChatGPT improved their bio and how they appeal to patients, to mental patients, but they overestimated how much it would help them. And to calibrate us in that respect is going to be tough, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as AI is still pretty new and we're still looking for valuable use cases in businesses, we don't know yet how we would judge these use cases and which people are good at judging when AI will actually deliver value. And I think that's a key role for leaders, but also like a skill that individuals need to learn.
There's very much that. I'm going to add a little bit to what you're saying here, though. As a former chief data and analytics officer, one of the biggest risks that you have is not having the ability to say that this is the return on investment. You need to be able to show that you're driving value. But that's really upsetting the apple cart, because the businesses are used to be the ones that are driving value. And actually trying to figure out, A, how you calculate value that you're delivering, and B, how to attribute it back, is a really gnarly problem that I don't know anybody has solved.
And the challenge is that when you try to measure it, you measure short-term outcomes as opposed to long-term outcomes.
Yeah, and I would add to that a little bit. When we're looking at leadership generally, and we look at it from the task perspective, and then the perspective of getting along with other people, getting that behavioral perspective. I think from the task end, we can pretty well quantify, efficiency improved by this percentage. But I think the area that becomes the concern is the humanistic, encouraging, the affiliative behavior, and other behaviors that are more like passive defensive, meaning conventional behavior. We've always done it this way. Or dependent behavior, or avoidance. All of those start to address our security needs. So we're so afraid sometimes to make that transition within organizations. And so I think that the easier version would be quantify the task side, but make sure that you understand the people side as well, and that change of behavior. Because that's what we've got to do, and that's what leaders have to do. Of course, it's safer to avoid things. It's safer to just don't see it, don't know anything about it, or as Dean DeCreamer says in his book, let the tech people figure that out. Let them lead. It's much safer, and that's avoidant behavior.
Absolutely. I want to just highlight one other thing here, though. It's one thing to calculate, but if you actually are in a living organization, there are usually many things happening. Right? And everybody's going to try to grab the credit. It's not because of your model that you introduced. It's because of the org change that we did and all the cultural changes that we're doing. So that attribution's really hard to come by. You can do calculations, but attribution's hard.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think there's the risks to the organization in terms of how people operate with each other. And obviously, there's a risk that you can't measure the value accurately, at the onset of determining whether or not you want to kind of go down the path of exploring something further. But the other, kind of maybe the risk-averse person in me and kind of the credit-oriented person in me always thinks about the downside and specifically liability. And so, in conservative sectors where there's a lot of liability as it relates to information that's being shared with consumers, whether it's in healthcare or in financial services, there's a heightened bar for exactly what you are putting your label behind in terms of what consumers are consuming. So if that has any kind of taint that has been attributed by an AI output that brings further liability to the organization from a business standpoint, not just internally but externally as well. So that's something that from I guess my being on this panel representing small businesses, that could be a death nail, right? If we can't address that at the outset.
And this may be a great segue because we had that, so from the moment it came out in November of 2002, right? We have been using it at Northeastern, and one of the first questions that came up was kind of, how do we know, how do we detect whether a student has written an essay in AI? And then the question more and more later on became like, who cares, right? So how do we have to know this? And if can we just judge the outcome? And of course, there's lots of more behavioral experience now that shows that even if the outcome may be better, if the consumer, for instance, know it's generated by AI, there seems to be a lot of discomfort, right? So how do you see the ethics around AI and transparency kind of evolving in this business setting?
So I have an interesting example. I love technology, and I adopted it as one of these early adopters. In the last couple of semesters, I attempted two ways. One was to look at an essay students had written assignments, right, 2 or 3 pages, and I went in and wrote my own feedback. And then I thought, well, let's just put this into ChatGPT. ChatGPT, provide me feedback, give me areas for improvement. And it was brilliant. It was absolutely, when I look at my feedback and the ChatGPT's feedback. So I thought, okay, now I'm going to take it one more experiment. Within Canvas, I sent out the ChatGPT feedback. And then I sent out my feedback. The response I received from one student was, lazy professor. Cheated. That I cheated as a professor from using ChatGPT to help me critique an essay. So I think that's, really brings it back to, I think you do have to be careful. Just like I say to my students, just tell me you use ChatGPT. I'm great with that. Just tell me.
Another, or Chris, any kind of your experience with using it in the classroom, or?
So I am right now actively revamping what I'm going to do in the fall. I really am. It's critical to me because I don't want to look stupid come autumn, and I'm going to. I mean, let's be honest. So what I want to do is I'm just creating everything that I'm going to do in the class to where it is their co-pilot. And I'm trying to think of exercises and ways that that could be done where I don't ignore it or pretend it's not there, but try to just be creative in my own way and pushing myself in terms of coming up with different questions. I'm working on it right now. I've given myself next month till August 1 to actually come up with this. And I think it's really important. And I think whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in enterprises, I think it is really a time for us to really push creativity. And I'm not sure what all that is. I've even in my own mind thought about, do we need some kind of a humanics boot camp or some kind of creative boot camp of sorts? But we need to push ourselves to come up and really come up with different things. And I'm doing that for me because I want to walk in the fall. I don't want to pretend it's not there. I want to use it and integrate it and make them do things with it, but then make them better.
Chris?
I'm struggling, I have to say. I don't have a good answer. I have a lot of questions. And one of the questions that I'm debating for my own teaching is how I can use AI or like encourage AI use in an equitable way. Because on one hand, if everyone can use AI, then in a way everyone has to use AI to meet the bar of expectations, right? Like writing a well-structured paragraph it's not a skill anymore if you're free to use AI. And that is really hard for a lot of students. And then everyone gets judged against this very high bar. And if someone wants to step back and say, no, I'd rather like do it myself and learn something doing it and like learn from that feedback, then I want some way of incorporating that.
And I think that also goes to, I think Linda in the pre-session noticed that the kind of language we get from, at least from ChatGPT now, right, is extremely verbose and encyclopedia.
It sounds like an encyclopedia to create credibility, I guess. The style is very interesting to observe.
The problem is that humans seem to like that kind of text better, right? Like it gets scored higher.
Yes, but it's also interesting because we're suddenly going from, texting, are you, and really avoiding language to suddenly embracing language. Like in the 19th century.
Yeah.
It's a huge shift.
And this really surprised me, right? So as a teenager growing up in Belgium, I got good scores on my, Dutch, German, and French essays, but the same professor rated my English essays very poorly. And I went to him and I say, what's going on? He's like, English is a short language. You have to write concise. Use the same word over and over again. So he was preparing me for my PhD later on. He's like, in French, German, Dutch, yes, you are rewarded for writing long poetic sentences. So it's kind of weird how that seems to have suddenly flipped, or has it?
One thing that I think is important, and I think it impacts businesses and us in terms of how we teach and what we teach. We heard Gary say what percentage to give to the AI, and then what percentage do we as humans intervene? Okay. But it takes expertise, it takes domain knowledge to know when to intervene. So how do you develop a pipeline of talent that is able to do that? And that is a real challenge because what's going to happen is we're going to atrophy a lot of these skills. So how do we keep it going? And I've seen this, you've all seen this. You've got a cyber attack, I saw this last summer, cyber attack, there's a hospital, business is down, everything is manual, we have to dispatch ambulances manually, and everybody's like, how do we do this?
Right.
Do you know? No, nobody knows. So we're atrophying these skills. So how do we maintain the skills? How do we cultivate them and know when to act? I think it's a real issue.
I suggest using the fax machine.
Chris, when I arrived, we had an interesting conversation about chatbots that were now replacing people in virtual meetings.
Yeah.
And, is that an acceptable approach? And in some ways, it's pretty horrifying because, why are you invited to a meeting? Well, that's a very interesting question. It's because often they expect you to have judgment and to intervene when it's appropriate. And so can that bot do that on your behalf? So are we going to have virtual meetings with bots just communicating with one another?
And virtual faculty
at least
communicating as well, right? I can see a faculty bot.
Yeah.
For some people, that seems to be the vision, that we have digital twins that we send to meetings, and then we don't need to go to the meetings anymore. But to me, that really seems to point to all kinds of other organizational problems. Why did we have that meeting in the first place if I don't need to actually be there? And if I'm really worried that we end up in a world where some people use AI to kind of write these verbose, long, sophisticated sounding emails, and then the next person uses ChatGPT to either respond to it right away or get a summary of the long email and then respond to that. And I don't know, we all feel there's so much dysfunction in corporate communication that using AI to solve that communication problem seems like a low-hanging fruit, but I'm worried we're solving the wrong problem.
So, Chris, you were talking also about the other side of the equation where you went off at site with your colleagues and actually managed to have this amazing creative session. Maybe coming out of this, that's what's going to start happening more because we're going to have the time to actually create as opposed to just bear witness. So
that would be really cool, but I think that is a choice that we have to make, right?
Yes.
Because we could also say, well, we saved some time, that's efficiency gain, so now we can cut costs, we trim
Cut
labor
people.
force, we trim people, or we can say, no, we saved these people time that they can use for creative tasks to come up with new ideas, and we free up their time to do something else. And David and I were working on a research project where we ask people, here's this technology invention that makes workers 20% more efficient. What do you do with their salary? Do you increase the salary? Do you decrease their salary? Do you fire people or keep them around and use their time for something else? And people generally don't have the tendency to say, oh, these people are more efficient, let's pay them more money. That's not where people go usually.
but if they're able to produce more value, then they should be more valued themselves.
They should be.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking this. Research shows humans need to be challenged. This is what you do. You wake up in the morning, you challenge yourself. You go into the workplace, you challenge yourself. Now, if I look at it in the other end, that AI is to make us more efficient and give us more time, are we really going to be? Are we going to turn to just be lazy?
Yeah.
Well, which was kind of where I wanted to get with our guest speaker today, Gary. Really more on that question, if a machine can teach me how to play chess, am I going to just use the machine? Or am I going to really dig deep inside and say, yeah, this is important to me? So I think that's probably my only concern right now with AI.
I think
go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, I think the ideal case is that you free up human capacity to solve higher level challenges
I agree.
that can't be solved by AI, at least in the immediate or even long term.
And we have to. I think that we don't have those answers yet, and we're trying to answer these questions with the information and knowledge that we currently have, and I think we really have to push that in terms of what that's going to be, because I think there's so many problems that we can address, and I really think it's really up to us to be able to do that, but we have to push that and not assume that, well, we have more time, all the rules are the way they've been. Well, no, the rules are changing, and we are going to change the rules and what we do with it.
And no one is going to give it to us, right?
That's
like
right.
the companies that build these AI systems, they're not going to make it available for free and say, now spend your time on the beach because you don't need to go to the office anymore. Like, that's not going to happen. It's like society needs to make those choices.
And I like the point you made about the challenges, right? So Kong here and his assistants, right? So they made this kind of bot of all of my published research. And I absolutely love it because, you know, since I became the Associate Dean of Research, I don't have much time for consultancy anymore. But I can just, you know, point companies to the bots, like ask the bot, right? And then I must admit, I learned a lot from the way they ask the questions, you know, what's going on in business. And I learned a lot from kind of my own answers because sometimes I'm like, hey, but I don't think that way anymore. I have updated, right? So that kind of, you know, even your own past writings can come back to you to have this with you. And I think this fits in general into kind of how do you use AI as a tool to empower people, right? Empower your reports, empower your students. So what do you think it's the best way to really democratize it, right? As Gary said, you know, democracy is great because you can make mistakes and it's not the end of the world. So how do we use AI to really empower people and let the decisions be made at the point that they're, you know, the best information or the instincts to have them optimized?
I think
Is that a
those
question?
that
Yes, that's a question. It's a long one.
those that figure it out, and we will figure it out. And I think together we can, DMSB, Northeastern, humanity, but those that do will thrive. And I really think we're going to see a lot of, you know, the Kmarts and the Pennies and the store. We're going to see a lot of companies fall by the wayside that are trying to, they think it's a plug and play. It's not a plug and play. One has to revamp everything, the business model and the way they think, the KPIs, everything has to be started from scratch. And I think if you're able to do that and be comfortable with it, I think you'll thrive.
I just want to add, though, that the shadow of the leader looms large.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so people are going to pick up how they should be behaving, hopefully from an AI-savvy leader. And
it's
if they're
where
not
leadership
AI-savvy,
comes in.
it's going to be a problem.
And I actually really love the sort of take back control. I personally thought that was really important because I think we all feel like we're losing control, like AI is just kind of taking over, and I like that. No, take back control because it's up to the leaders to be able to do that.
And I would add, I think we are such a great competitive advantage to accomplish this, particularly here at the business school, because we have this thing called the co-op program.
Yes.
And what I'm recognizing is a student will return after a co-op, comes up, have a conversation with me, and as a faculty member, that student is educating me. That student is passing on knowledge that's taking place right now in the co-ops. So I think that's where we foster this sort of faculty understanding, which ultimately leads to a better environment.
And I think another way to empower people and society overall with AI is by thinking about ways in which we can use AI to enhance collective intelligence. So whenever we can connect people to really leverage their intellectual curiosity, their intellectual diversity by like connecting those parts and helping people learn, I think that's a big kind of opportunity that we can pursue with AI.
Yeah, and whether that education is taking place in the classroom or you're educating a consumer on a product, I think there's a lot of parallelism there.
And this goes all the way back, kind of, you know, when I was in my PhD, one of my favorite papers, this is 1990, just basically said model plus manager is better than model alone or manager alone, right? So we have known for a long time that combining kind of consistent tools that are reliable together with human judgment is a recipe for success. And we saw that also in other places. I think in the interest of time, I would love to open it up to the audience. And any questions for this esteemed panel? Oh, fantastic. Go ahead, Amir.
Thank you. Thank you for the panelists. You talked about AI in the context of the classroom and organizations, large or small. But we're facing in our society so many daunting social, environmental problems. How do you want to speak a little bit about how do you envision AI as a tool to address some of these big problems?
I can take that one. I'm working with people at the United Nations, UNDP specifically, that are using AI to advance climate change specifically, but the Sustainable Development Goals more generally. And it's really fascinating what they do with AI. One kind of pattern that I see over and over again is that AI lowers the barrier to entry to work with data. So you have local organizations, local businesses in developing countries that now suddenly get access to very sophisticated tools to solve local problems. One thing, for example, they are doing is they're using a lot of image analysis AI to work with satellite data to, for example, detect illegal dumping sites for waste or illegal burning of forests. And here, AI really has like a really big impact to advance.
I mean, I kind of see it all over with supply chain improvements, the availability of medical attention. I mean, it's going to come from what's developing in industries, but it will, of course, impact society as a whole. I actually see a big concern, however, which is economics. What is going to happen to the economy? Because as we become more and more efficient, what are those people going to do? How are they going to earn their living? So I think there's a lot that's going to have to get figured out from a societal perspective.
You can give it to Bruce, and I'll hand it over to Fernando.
So one of the things David talked about in some of his initial remarks was, at some level, you've got to change the process. It's not just sort of try this out and experiment with it. I wonder if any of you can talk about, this is a place where we've changed the process and Gen AI is working for us. Any can comment on that?
Does it have to be Gen AI?
I don't know. What are the rules, David? Anything you like, ma'am.
I mean, I can talk to what we were doing at Verizon with workforce optimization, where we were using AI to basically determine how many field engineers should appear in a given day as we were trying to roll out 5G. I mean, it's very different rolling out 5G in Arkansas versus New York City. I can talk to workforce optimization in terms of customer service, 32,000 agents, all sorts of differentiation in their knowledge. All of a sudden, because of COVID, they're working from home. Instead of doing 8-hour shifts, now you've got 2-hour shifts. I can talk about, how do you know when to reopen a retail store emerging from COVID? I mean, we used it to to billions of dollars of value, which of course I was not attributed.
I'm thinking in terms of sort of your question, a way to use it. Course evaluations. So much in terms of faculty, reward, merit, et cetera, promotions often are based upon those course evaluations. And for the most part, they're looked at in silo. Imagine AI taking that large amount of data that we have, whether it's paper form or digital form, ultimately, and being able to sort of, take that data and help us make decisions in sort of a broader comparison. I think it does to some extent, where you'll have like the department mean, department average. That means nothing to us, right? Also, look at the amount of data that our students are providing us in the section questions, the open essay questions, essentially. What could the instructor do to improve? What were the great benefits of this class? The amount of written text on those course evaluations is incredible. but it's just sitting there. So I think that's where AI, one of the things that we could do to really deploy AI.
Yeah, thank you, Con. I'm going to take the liberty to be a little bit provocative with a question that I typically get, and I think it's a great question to bounce to the speakers here. First of all, it's like, what is different with AI with respect to other technological changes that we've had in the past? Actually, to me, it was actually very interesting to hear Nada, for instance, saying that, well, it's the same thing that we used to hear 20 years ago. We had the same issues, and then, David put a slide up there saying, it's not just simplifying the technology. It is not like you just plug and play and you get results. It is also that you have to involve people, and therefore you need a culture and you need leaders. And then I hear you guys, and it makes me feel better because I just came from sabbatical and I had not ready my syllabus. And then I'm thinking, how am I going to introduce all of this AI? And I see that there's no clear solution yet. So, the typical criticism is AI will be, adopted throughout the economy, and therefore, it's not going to make a big difference after everybody has adopted it, like as we have seen with a lot of technologies, and it will all rest on the execution at the end. So, what's your view on that?
My hunch is that AI is not going to be all that different. It's just another technology that offers the opportunity to reap some savings, some improvements at some parts of the process. And when you read statistics, or like predictions rather, about whatever, 80% of workforce will have at least some portion of their work be affected by AI, that may very well be true, but it's not that AI is completely replacing complete individuals, right? Like, it's affecting some part of their job, and now we need to rearrange the jobs to potentially get any benefits out of that. And that's going to be exactly the change process that David talks about. That's exactly the process that we went through with other generations of technological improvements, right? Like when we adopted email, like that didn't replace very, very few entire jobs that affected a lot of jobs, but didn't lead to improvements in firms' bottom line by just implementing that technology, but trickle down by changing some processes. And that takes time and is complicated and requires all kinds of other things to fall into place.
And you also mentioned, as far as it just kind of creates a level playing field when everybody is using it. So it has a different expectation now, but then we're just moving to the next level and using it.
Well, that's a level playing field, presuming it will continue to be at essentially no cost, right? So ChatGPT, I just upgraded to the $20 a month version. Okay, so if I in my classroom start talking about using ChatGPT in a different variety, what about the student who cannot afford the $20? So then it becomes I think it becomes a real serious question, as Dean DeCremer has mentioned, in terms of ethics, specifically in this question of equity, and that distribution is going to be key. You may have written about that. I haven't read the book, but I ordered it.
Okay, a few more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was the point I was going to ask about, is whether AI is closing the gap in the digital divide, or is it actually making it wider? The haves and the have-nots, I mean, in some sense, it empowers people with the capability to compete with others maybe more easily, but they have to, we're sitting in an academic environment. They have to have access to the technology.
Yeah. What I see in my research, the high-skilled benefit much more from AI than the low-skilled. And in that setting, AI just amplifies an already existing skill gap.
Do you have a question at the back there? Yeah, go ahead. I'll give it.
Well, I'm really interested in this concept. So imagine right now that there is a consulting firm somewhere with people in the back room thinking about how they can advise a client to operate a business using artificial intelligence to the extent that they don't need any more employees. Should this firm take that advice? And what controls are in place that would stop a firm that is really interested in maximizing profit from taking that advice? Does the firm actually have an obligation to use that advice? What would a CEO have to say and convince their board to say, we're not going to take that advice, when we could jump our shareholder value by who knows how much? This is a business school question. Since I'm in a business school, I thought I would ask it.
I think there's, kind of some inherent barriers to be able to even conceptualize what that could look like for certain industries. So ones that are highly regulated, regulations need to catch up with exactly who at the end of the day is being held accountable for that organization and what its products or services, might be offered to consumers and so forth. So, if someone were to approach that to me and our organization, I would say, well, we're regulated by the SEC and FINRA, and there is no guidance that's been put out there around, artificial intelligence and, the recommendations or anything else that might come out of that. So we just simply can't even, bring that to the board, never mind, kind of figure out exactly internally what that would even look like.
I don't think we have the sophistication of control frameworks to get anywhere near considering what you're describing. And if there's one thing that's true about the world, it is always changing. And therefore, the data is always going to be changing. And the models are going to have to continuously be tweaked. And you're going to have to monitor those models and intervene. And so it's not going to become entirely autonomous. I do believe there's going to be more and more autonomy. I mean, certainly digital twin drives towards that type of capability, and that's becoming more and more available, those frameworks. But there's still a real need for continuous monitoring, oversight, and tweaking to what the real world is about today versus what it looked like a month ago.
And in order to do that, you need skilled people still around, right? You can't
With
automate
judgment.
them all away.
With judgment
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
domain knowledge.
that's right. Great question, though.
Hi. Yeah, I'm curious how you all think about the environmental impact of all this stuff, right? So, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but the statistic of GPT-4 was something like 30,000 airplanes flying back and forth across the company multiple times to train once, right? GPT-5 is 10x that much. That's just to train it, let alone the invocation of it and the amount of people invoking it. And I'm always interested to know how people think about the sustainability aspect of it and the environmental impact.
We're not thinking about it enough. And they're keeping it kind of quiet for the most part. But you're absolutely right. This could have huge environmental implications, and that we're going to probably need to put some kind of, again, control framework in place so that we're not eating up our resources for silly prompts. I don't know how that's going to happen and what constitutes silly. But
Maybe
anyway.
just to build on that, I think on some level that's an attribution problem, right? Like there are clearly uses of AI that are a net negative in terms of environmental impact. There are uses that saved someone to travel somewhere, and that's a net benefit. And I think it's too simple to just say, oh, the environmental impact is bad. But I think it's also too simple to say there surely are uses that offset that, and so it's all good. I think it's a really complicated question that requires some sophisticated attribution model.
I love this one, and also Linda's thing to attribution, right? Because that's my business. And talking to the ethics question, the long-term effect of something. Very often you basically approximate it with what I call proxy variables or KPIs, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of, hey, is AI good or bad? Maybe we don't know the ultimate outcome, but can we find something that happens soon that we know is a proxy? Economists call it a surrogate, which I think is a horrible word for it, but a proxy for what's going to happen then later on.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Ravi, go ahead.
Yeah. just a quick. I'm not sure whether this.
Don't ask us about chess, okay?
No. I heard from someone just today that half our co-op students are not able to get jobs that they got earlier. So I'm wondering if this thing is hitting us even faster than I suspected. And from the panel, I'm not able to tell whether this is an urgent problem or this is like other technologies that have come before, computerization, electricity, and so on. And you think it's going to hit you very hard, but actually it plays out in slow motion, doesn't happen overnight. I can't reconcile that with this statistic. I don't know if it's true or not, but I just heard it.
I don't know. I think one thing that will for sure happen, I predict, is that people use it as an excuse to stop hiring, to hire fewer people. So the actual benefit may be kind of lagging and come at a later point. But as a short-term measure, maybe that's a good argument for a CEO, for some hiring managers to say we're not hiring as many people.
And I just want to take us back to just 2 years ago, the metaverse was everything, right? And I'm like, no, it's not 5 years away, it's more than 20 years away. These are all of the obstacles, and they're very real in kind of getting the value from AI too that we're working on. Okay, I think it's time for us to relax in a more informal setting, have some drinks. And I just want to congratulate and thank our wonderful panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.